Welcome to EdSpace, in which we discuss some of the highlights of the week's news with Mint's editor, Sukumar. Thank you for joining us, Sukumar. Let's start with the news that Air India has asked the real estate consultant DTZ for its help to raise money by selling off some of its real estate assets and also leasing and redeveloping some of the others. Did this come as a surprise move, and what's it going to mean for the airline? Will it help it to qualify for the government's bailout package?
It is a bit of a surprise because like all state-owned companies, Air India has a lot of real estate. If you look at one constant for all state-owned companies, they all have real estate, and much of it is prime real estate, right? It's in the heart of cities, it's in big cities, and Air India has got a lot of it. It's got real estate in Delhi, it's got real estate in Mumbai, it's got this fairly iconic building in Marine Drive in Mumbai, where the TCS office used to be based there at one point in time, and the TCS headquarters used to be based there at one point in time, and it's a magnificent building. And you don't get real estate like that very easily. So if there is any way in which you can monetize it, make money of it to the advantage of the airline, I think it's a good move. And the airline needs to meet some of these commitments, reduce interest payments, reduce debt, to qualify for the bailout package. And the big question about the bailout package has really not been about whether the package will work or not, because the jury is still out on that. Because I personally believe that the package is not going to work unless you change fundamental things in the airline. But whether the airline would qualify for it or not, that was the big question. And if they do things like this, and this I'm told is the first step, what they're doing with DTZ. Maybe if they do more of it, they will be able to raise a significant amount of money, and I think it's a good revenue stream for them.
And so does the airline have more assets that could possibly be turned into revenue later?
It's got more assets. It's got more real estate in other cities. It's got assets in every major city. In Chennai, for instance, there's been talk about in the first phase redeveloping staff quarters near the international airport. But apart from that, in the heart of the city, in the central business district, they have a multi-story building which serves as their headquarters right now. And if they were to redevelop that and give it out, lease it out to banks, financial institutions, companies looking for headquarters space, I think it's a good move.
And is DTZ likely to be the only partner, or will there be other real estate consultants coming in?
For stage one, it's likely to be DTZ. And DTZ was chosen after, like all state-owned companies, a very transparent process of asking for bids, asking for applications from companies interested in becoming the consultant. I'm sure when they decide on stage two, they'll again have to decide what the properties are and then seek bids from other consultants. So they probably will go for another one.
And also this week, the 2G auction ended with just a third of its target met, and no takers at all for Delhi and Mumbai circles. What do we think went wrong? Was the estimate unrealistic?
The estimate was unrealistic. I think the reserve price for the auction was too high. And I think the government's excuse that its hands were tied because the court had ordered that it go with this methodology is not entirely accurate, because the telecom regulator had recommended 18,000 crore and the court had said the telecom regulator would recommend the price. But a ministerial panel had downscaled that. They brought it down from 18,000 to 14,000 crore. This was, of course, for 5 megahertz. And still way too high, and way too high for 2 or 3 fundamental reasons. One, there is a lot of regulatory uncertainty about this sector still. Regulatory and legal, right? Because the 2G case, the final proceedings are yet to be rung, and it's going to take some time. The second thing is there is intense competition in most major telecom markets. Mumbai's got around 10 or 11 mobile telephony companies competing for customers. Delhi's got around 6. I don't think it's going to work for all of them to, just think of what would happen. All of them pay huge sums of money for spectrum and then invest capital on rolling out their networks, and then you have to market it, and then you don't make enough money because you don't get enough customers. So telecommunications in India, mobile telephony in India is not the hugely profitable business that it once was.
And so why the lack of takers for Delhi and Mumbai, do you think?
Because of the competition.
Right.
Yeah, you have 11 companies in Mumbai, you have 6 in Delhi. Why would anyone in their right minds want to enter a market as competitive as this, and I dare say as saturated as this. Because if you need to build market share, you probably have to steal it off other companies, right? You're going to have to poach customers, which means, and every time you acquire customers by poaching them off other people, you have to cut rates, you have to get into a price war, and we all know what happened the last time there was a price war. The last time there was a price war was actually in 2008, 2009, and the profits of almost all telecom companies eroded significantly, and then there's some kind of price stability that's come back over the last 6 to 12 months, but that would just vanish if these companies had decided to enter the Delhi and Mumbai markets again.
And so these rapidly growing rural markets like Bihar, do they show more potential?
Definitely, but again, I think what we are seeing in these auctions, because I know that Bihar was one of the most sought after circles in this, is companies have become extremely conservative and conscious of what the cost of spectrum is, what the cost of their operations is, how much they can afford to pay. I think all of them held themselves back from overbidding, which is very different from the kind of behavior we saw even during the 3G auctions, although I don't think you can really compare. I think fundamentally you have to ask two questions, right? And if you're the government, the first one is, what's your objective for the telecommunications sector, right? You can't say maximizing revenue is my objective for the telecommunications sector, maximizing revenue from the sale of spectrum, because I think that's a very ungovernment kind of thing to say. You need to have a far more lofty, so to say, objective as to what you would achieve. And all through the 2000s, amidst all the ad hoc allocation of spectrum, the government of the day did have a fairly lofty objective. They said, we want to increase India's teledensity. That's changed. Now, right now, to me, sitting here on the outside, it seems like their only objective is to maximize revenue, and you can't have that. The second thing you'll have to ask yourself is an auction an ideal way, the perfect way of allotting something like spectrum? Now, I know the courts have said you have to do this way, but I think the government has to really sit down and think about it, because across the world, the debate is still going on. The United States, for instance, after a particularly bad experience in the late 90s, in 1999, when they gave out 3G spectrum, realized that auctioning it was not the right way. The United Kingdom and Germany, the next year in 2000, went out and auctioned 3G spectrum, because I think they were very, very taken up by the kind of money the United States made. Interesting thing is the United States gave that money back, and in 2000 sort of did a reallocation which was not strictly based on the auction process. But Germany and the UK still went ahead a year later, and many people still hold that responsible for the telecoms crash of 2001. That the main reason for that was were these huge sums of money that companies paid for 3G auction. And what are you going to do with the money? Right, to me, that's a sub-question of the second issue, right? If you're going to raise so much money by selling spectrum, you surely can't use it to bridge your deficit. You have to use it for the benefit of the sector. So if I were the government, I would say I'm going to use that money on broadband in rural areas, because I think the next big revolution in Indian telecommunications is going to be wireless broadband. So you have to do something about that. Maybe with devices, but I don't think they're thinking along those terms. All they're thinking about is 40,000 crores or 30,000 crores and fiscal deficit, let's bridge it, which I think is entirely the wrong kind of thinking to do.
Okay, and we've got the winter session of the Parliament about to commence, which means that the government's facing the prospect of another motion to vote on FDI. Are we going to see a repeat, do you think, of what happened in the monsoon session with a complete stalling of Parliament if that happens?
I would think so, because let's be very clear. By law, I don't think the government, I know that the government doesn't need to have a vote for FDI, right? It's not a reform measure that needs to be passed by Parliament. It's something that the government can do. It's an executive power of the government. Much like CEOs can do certain things without really checking with the board, right? The board needs to keep an eye, but everything doesn't need to be a board resolution. Everything doesn't need to be an annual, you don't need to have an extraordinary general body meeting of all shareholders and decide. That's not how companies work. That's not how the government works. But that said, the Indian parliamentary system does have provision for anyone to bring about a motion with a voting at the end of it, right? Which is what the opposition is now threatening to do. The interesting thing is the permission for this has to be given by the Speaker in the lower house and by the chairperson of the upper house in the upper house, in the Rajya Sabha. And I don't think either of these people is going to be willing to give that permission. And they're entirely within their rights to deny that permission, irrespective of what. I'm sure the opposition will cry political bias and whatever else, but at the end of the day, it's their right to say yes or no, and they'll probably say no. And if they say no, the only option left open to these people is to either have a debate without voting, which I'm not sure they want to do, right? Their whole thing is we want to make a point of this. The other thing is to simply obstruct business of the House. So I have a feeling that there is my own sense is there's a very, very high probability that we're going to see significant lack of activity in the House. Nothing much is going to get done.
Do you think it's going to start to resemble what's been happening over the last couple of years in America, with the opposition just stalling continually rather than coming together to form a consensus?
Yeah, I think so. The last couple of years in the United States has been horrible. They've been unable to... And in the United States, the problems are far more significant, right? Because there was a sort of a time bomb that's been ticking away. And they all knew that there was a deadline, and they missed the deadline, right? This was the November 2011 deadline, which was set for announcing deficit cuts, moves that would cut the deficit, in the absence of which this fiscal cliff thing, the sort of nuts and bolts that go into what everyone is calling the fiscal cliff would sort of come into effect automatically under a law that they previously passed. And they just missed the option. Why did they miss it? They just missed the opportunity. Why did they miss it? Because they were too busy squabbling with each other.
Right.
So,
and allowing the Bush tax cuts to expire, which is what Obama has been saying he's wanted to do since the beginning of his presidency,
and that's probably what he's going to push for again. Many would say that he has a marginally upper hand. So he's going to say, listen, this is my plan. Let's pass a legislation that extends the life of these tax cuts. Because in the absence of that, effective tax rates across in various sectors in the U.S., the tax revenue, if you look at that, would go up 20%, right, on the basis of these things. And you do that at a time when the economy is not entirely out of the woods. You risk a recession all over again, and I don't think anyone wants to do that.
Thank you so much for those insights, Sukumar, and thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for more.